Good morning, everyone. My name is Lee Hermiston, and I'm a reporter with the Gazette. I'm your moderator for the emergency management panel. And I'd like to start things off by having our three panelists introduce themselves. Craig, you want to go ahead and start? Craig, you're muted. Yeah.
Okay, I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
The host had us muted, so I'm unmuted. My name is Craig Fugate. I am probably best known in your state as the administrator of FEMA in the Obama administration. But I've also worked at state and local level. I served as the emergency management director for the state of Florida for a number of years under Governor Jeb Bush and dealt with numerous hurricanes. I also served as a county emergency manager. I came out of the fire rescue background. So I've worked at local government, state government, federal government. And when I was a local county official, I dealt with several extreme wind events that weren't hurricanes and weren't tornadoes. And had a lot of the characteristics we now refer to as derechos. So been doing this for a while, but again, the experiences I've had have been all the way from local government to the federal government.
All right, welcome. Chief Smith, you want to go next?
Sure. Greg Smith. I'm fire chief with the city of Cedar Rapids. I've been with City of Cedar Rapids Fire Department for 26 years, starting as a firefighter in 1994 and promoting up through the ranks, and been serving as fire chief for about a year and a half now. Background does include 10 years with the state of Iowa incident management team. So some of the bigger disasters I've been involved in were the floods of 2008 here in Cedar Rapids. I was actually captain at that time, and the day of the floods, an acting battalion chief working on one side of the river with some of the boat rescues and that type of stuff. Was joined with Steve OConnor when he was with Cedar Rapids Police Department as co-incident commanders during the 2016 flooding event in Cedar Rapids. And then, of course, the recent pandemic and derecho, and served in those capacities. So happy to be here and looking forward to it.
All right, welcome, Chief. And Steve, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Steve OConnor, I'm the Linn County Emergency Management Coordinator. I've been in this role for about 2.5 years. It started in February of 2018. Prior to that opportunity, I was with the Cedar Rapids Police Department for about 32 years, 10 months, 14 days, but I'll call it 33 years. Before that, I worked for a public safety agency in Minnesota. Most of my experiences and disasters has been through the law enforcement end of it. I was able to lead the patrol division in the 2008 floods that happened, as Chief Smith mentioned, and then kind of stood up after that, we stood up a local or Cedar Rapids incident management team. In 2009, I was asked to participate in the state's Type 3 incident management team, and I've been serving in that role now as an incident commander in that role since 2009. My incident command responsibilities have really been over the last 3 years in that role. And that, for those that don't know, the Type 3 incident management team really responds to other agencies and other communities in Iowa to help them respond to disasters and help them work through the incident management system to respond and recover from disasters. And it's a team set up by and through the state. Also have some military experience. I spent a little over 20 years in the Iowa National Guard as an artillery soldier, so my hearing is not the best, but I'll do the best to persevere today. Thank you for having me.
All right, welcome. Well, let's start with an overview of the August 10th derecho and the impact it had on our region and the challenges it created in terms of a response to that storm.
You want me to start then, Lee?
Yeah. Steve or Chief Smith, either one of you are welcome to chime in.
Sure, I'll kind of tee it up, and then I'll let Chief Smith add on here if that's okay with you, Chief.
Yep, that works.
We started monitoring the possibility of a windstorm early in the morning that day. We'd received some communication from the National Weather Service that there was a particularly strong group of thunderstorms that was moving out of the Dakotas and Nebraska area, well west of Iowa at the time, and moving across the state, or could potentially move across the state Sustained winds were in the 60 to 80 mile per hour area, and the storm was moving across the state at about 50 to 60 miles per hour. So in terms of the timing of that, we knew that it was going to probably arrive in the Linn County area around noontime, plus or minus, depending on what happens with the storms. We have good partnership with the National Weather Service, both in the Quad Cities and Des Moines, and they were able to give us some real-time data on the storm as it came across the state. We started really picking it up when it left Des Moines and continued east. And about 10 o'clock, we had a weather briefing with our National Weather Service partners who indicated that this could potentially have 60 to 80 mile per hour winds associated with this storm. They weren't predicting any tornadic activity, although that's not uncommon in these. And we later learned that we did have some tornadoes in this event. At about 11:25, the National Weather Service issued a particularly dangerous situation alert. And then shortly thereafter, they issued a severe thunderstorm watch. Not long after that, they issued at 11:48 a severe thunderstorm warning for Linn County. And about 12:17, a severe thunderstorm warning was issued that went from 12:17 to 1:15. At about 12:19, we knew the storm was going to be on us. At about 12:30, we activated the Linn County outdoor warning sirens. And about 12:30, the storm hit Cedar Rapids with winds 80 to 100 miles per hour. We know now that some of those winds were higher in some areas and created the damage and destruction that we had. In terms of the disaster moving on from there, just an interesting point, the storm was 770 miles long from where it started. And it was about, at the widest point, some 140 or 150 miles wide. We also learned that the majority or the damage was concentrated in the Marion, Cedar Rapids, Linn County area. That's where the hardest areas hit were from this storm. So we, at 12:30, we watched this thing for about 40 minutes, listened to it roar outside, and then about an hour later, we were able to go outside and kind of start beginning to assess what had just happened. Chief Smith, I throw it back to you.
Yeah. Kind of like Steve mentioned, I on a personal note, I knew that we had a fairly severe storm coming. I woke up probably like most of Eastern Iowa and, saw the weather and now, hey, we have a chance for some pretty severe storms come around noontime or so on the morning of August 10th. But I happened to call my daughter who lived in Ames, and she had stated, it was after the storm had moved through, and she had through Ames area, and she had stated how bad the storm was and keep an eye out for it. So I knew it was coming, but certainly didn't know the level of destruction. And as we all know, around 12:30 or so on that day, I like to give Steve a hard time about sounding the sirens when it was still sunny out, but as sounded the sirens and it's he, as he stated, knowing how fast the storm was moving and quickly the storm hit, and obviously everybody was experiencing the same thing, high winds, bad storm. Still thinking this is, it's Iowa, been through some pretty severe storms before, but I'd say about 10 minutes into the incident, one of my assistant chiefs came up and said he had received a call from our dispatch center, which is over in the police department building, stating that they were getting overwhelmed with calls, the number of calls, and that there was some threat to possibly losing our dispatch center, which subsequently did not happen, but he went over there to help prioritize calls and change our response profiles based on the number of calls that we were getting. And while en route, he called me before we lost cell phones and all of the other stuff and said, it's bad, we need the urban search and rescue team. So I immediately called Steve, that's our conduit and our path to activate the state urban search and rescue team, of which Cedar Rapids hosts one half of that team in the state of Iowa, along with Sioux City. And so we were, that was the first signal of how bad the devastation was. I was here at Central Fire Station looking outside, seeing how high the winds were. Obviously the sustained winds for that 10 minutes is very unusual in most storms. And so had an idea of how bad it was. We were obviously, all of our crews were starting to get the number of calls citywide, and we started immediately calling in resources as best as we could within that first 15 to 20 minutes of that storm. And already by that point, we had the people that we could contact, with the power going out and with internet going down and all that type of stuff. And we couldn't send out the call for callback like we normally do through our system. It just wouldn't send out. And so we started making phone calls of those who we knew lived closest. And I'd say to a person, we were getting reports of, yeah, I'd love to come in, but I can't get out of my driveway. I can't get down the street. I can't, I'll be there as soon as I can, but I'm going to have to cut some trees out of the way before I can get there. So that really showed us the level of disaster. And we ended up having a record day as far as responses, and I can get to that down the road. But obviously our crews were responding. I got a text message from captain at the police department, Captain Hembra, and we discussed calling in the city's incident management team. As Steve mentioned, we've had a city level incident management team it's shortly after the floods of 2008, I'd say for about 10 years now. And we exercise that every year or so, but we talked about getting that team activated. And I'd say by about 3 o'clock, we had all the team members there to start the process of planning for the next operational period, starting operational periods, and really working within that FEMA National Incident Management System framework with that. And so we quickly were responding while our crews were responding. Public Works started clearing debris via snowplow routes. PD was responding to the number of calls. And so just obviously, as I mentioned quickly, saw the level of devastation and knew that this was like a storm that we hadn't had here in decades or centuries, at least locally. So, and again, I can get into more detail as we discuss further on, but that's kind of my initial reaction and initial experience of the storm.
And Craig, how common are events like this? What would you compare it to? And what Chief Smith and Steve have described, is that pretty typical with these storms, that level of devastation?
Okay, I'm unmuted again.
Okay.
They're more common than we realized. In fact, there was a recent windstorm in the Northeast that the Weather Service has come back and reclassified as a derecho. And we probably have seen previous events that were derechos but weren't classified that way. But essentially what we're looking at are weather, as was described, a rather long front of severe weather moving rapidly across the region. These are often multiple state events. And within that area, we'll have degrees of damages approaching what we would typically see in F3 to F4 tornadoes. But unlike a tornado, which may be measured a couple blocks wide, this, as was pointed out, you could literally have 100 miles of devastation moving across an area. And so we've seen these before. We're seeing them maybe more frequently because we're classifying them that way. But generally, the first time somebody's hit with a derecho, everybody's going, what's a derecho? Never heard of that before. But we are starting to see, the Weather Service classifying these events as derechos. But the question is, are we seeing more of them, or are we just classifying these events more correctly?
Sure. So what are the plans in our region for an after-action review of the response? What would the goals of that review be? And does the response to a disaster like this become a chapter in the emergency response plans going forward, similar to what I assume the response to the 2008 floods were? And Steve, if you want to start.
Okay, I'm unmuted again. Thanks, sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think any disaster that you have, you always have an opportunity to learn from what happened, what went well and what went bad. I was an Army general that said the best laid plans only survive meeting with the first contact with the enemy. In this case, the best plans that we have only survive the situation that we have in place. And I think every agency, from our agency, the cities, the other agencies that participated in this, should go back and look at how they performed in this disaster, what they learned from it, what they can do differently, and then aggregate that together. I'm not aware of any regional AARs that are being considered, although I think there needs to be a way for us to gather those lessons learned from all of our partner agencies and put those in place. Certainly there were things, and I think Chief Smith would admit this, that there were things that we'd all do differently today had we had a different situation, had we had better situational awareness, had we had better communications, had we had one other piece of information, but that's just the nature of disasters. And I'm sure Mr. Fugate understands that as well. You do the best you can with what you have. The systems are in place to operate the way that they're supposed to operate. And in this case, I think they did. Certainly each disaster creates a certain amount of chaos, if you will, or unplanned events. But our focus really was to kind of work the issues, not focus as much as we could on any drama, get the needs that we needed to get to our community addressed. And those are things like life safety issues, stabilize the incident, make sure it doesn't get any better, and then continue to improve on the situation. We plan to do at our agency an after action of all of the functions that we're responsible for as it relates to the comprehensive emergency management plan that each community has and participates in and has a stake in. And so we plan to review those and find out what went well and what didn't go so well, what we need to modify and what we don't. And this is a large, by any stretch of the imagination, a complex, large incident that was unusual for this area. And so I think we can all learn from it. So I think it's important that we do that. I think we have an opportunity to learn from this and be better at what we do next time. The system worked the way it should work. I'm not advocating for a complete overhaul, but I think, maybe in terms of how we look at that is how did we perform according to how the system is supposed to work, and use that as a starting point.
Sure. And Chief, what about on the city level?
Yeah, same thing, similar to what Steve talked about. Actually, our assistant chief has done some fairly, I'll call it intimate after action reviews, a couple crews at a time over, I'd say 2 to 3 weeks ago, really spent a lot of time meeting with each crew and talking about the response and kind of that level and doing an after action review. Our training department is currently kind of categorizing and writing up the lessons learned and lessons reinforced from that. We have plans for city level director team to do an after action review here in about the next 2 weeks. And then after that, we'll bring our city incident management team together, probably virtually, obviously, to do an after action review. So, we're in the process of doing that as well. And that's something that we do specifically here at Fire, but after floods of 2008, we had an after action review. Same thing with the floods of 2016. So it's imperative and important to do those after action reviews. The lessons learned and lessons reinforced. It's just important that's how we institutionalize what we've learned. Hopefully, when I'm gone, when our, all of our city director team has, in the next decade or whatever it is, rotates out, that we can have this institutionalized so that, the next disaster or disasters in the future, we've implemented those. And I'll give a couple examples of the benefit of that is after the floods of 2008, we had the cities, obviously, with the level of the flooding, the city's wastewater treatment plant was overwhelmed. The water system was not compromised, but very close to that. And the city really has invested in that. And there was no, the generators that were used for water and wastewater were working as they needed to. And there was no threat of compromise of the city's water system, wastewater system. And really that was a blessing in this disaster. We were without power. There was debris all over the place, but the beautiful thing was that people could go to their tap and get water. And that really, that really helped during this incident. It was just one thing that we knew we could rely on, was that everybody had potable water, and everybody had the avenue to get rid of their wastewater through the system as they normally do. And so, those types of things will really help, and we would really, we will benefit from doing the after action in this disaster as well, on what we can implement and institutionalize those lessons that we've learned and from this as well.
Sure. And Craig, what should a good after action review involve and entail, and what should the outcomes of that review involve?
Well, I think folks have already really described what they're doing, but the way I like to look at it in after action is identify things that worked, and then identify things you need to do differently. And don't focus on people, focus on systems. If you really think about it, it's hard to plan for everything that could happen. And that's one of our traps, is we'll plan for our last disaster and hope it adapts to the next one. What you're really trying to build, as both of them have described, is a problem-solving engine of how you take the structures of our communities that day to day are designed around emergencies and normal functions. And then what happens when a disaster occurs and those systems won't cope, and you now have to do things very differently. You may have to be engaging and working with people that you're not traditionally on a day-to-day basis engaged with. And so it's that ability to take a step back and go, how did our systems work and how did our team work at the federal level? Now, I'll give you an example of how this worked. It was one of the things that was interesting. When this was getting close to hitting, the National Weather Service issued a warning for a particularly dangerous situation. That language actually originated out of the Joplin tornado. Because when the Joplin tornado hit, it was a F5, but there was no way to differentiate between an F0 on the Fugate scale and an F5. It's just a tornado warning. Just like severe thunderstorms warnings, as they're issued, don't really differentiate between one that may be producing hail and high winds of 50 to 60 miles an hour and one that is, tornadic wind speeds. And so the after action of that was making sure that the Weather Service more clearly identified the life-threatening situations that just issuing a tornado warning or just issuing a severe thunderstorm warning wouldn't communicate. So it's important as we look at these to take lessons of not just how we responded, but how did the public do? How did they get the information? How did they process that? Involving our business community, community leaders, and community organizations. Because as you find in these disasters, we always tend to focus on what government did or didn't do. Yet a lot of what's going to happen in both before and the immediate aftermath is neighbors helping neighbors.
You bet. How much do you see the need for, we know that the police department, fire department, and emergency management, ambulance services regularly train together. After this incident, where there were so many agencies, and a lot of them being social service agencies, were brought in to assist folks, is there a need to start training with those agencies more, or are you already doing that?
I'll jump in, Lee, if I can. So part of our responsibility at Linn County Emergency Management is we're a risk county. We have a nuclear power plant in our community that's soon to be shut down. So we do rely on our local other service organizations for that training, and we do train at least twice a year with drills and exercises with them, sometimes more if we can. So we do partner with those agencies, the Red Crosses of the world, the Mass Care, the ESF 6 folks on that, the schools, transportation, utilities, public roadways, those kinds of things. We do that, and we have done that. COVID-19 is throwing a little wrench in that plan across many agencies that normally train together, in that you don't have a room full of people in your emergency management EOC because you're dealing with COVID. And there's a lot of organizations that don't allow participation in those exercises because of their own protocols. But we do a good job, I think, locally of training with those organizations. Now, as we move out of the Duane Arnold Energy Center role and we move into more of strictly all hazards emergency operations center, we will continue to do that and continue to work on exercises like this and scenarios such as this so that we can get better at what we do. The other thing I think that's a challenge too, and not even to mention, COVID, but there's a lot of turnover in organizations. I think Chief Smith mentioned it, is, how do you bring those people that are new to an organization in get them up to speed so that they're trained and that they can continue to carry on and institutionalize that for organizations. Not saying that any agency is immune from that, because every agency turns people over. We just need to figure out a way to continue that momentum and keep people actively trained and engaged. So I think there's always an opportunity for us. We offer that. Anybody that wants to have us attend their training or help them with training, we always offer that and make ourselves available to set that training up or host that any way we can. Moving forward, our challenge now is how do we reinvent training in a virtual world to make it impactful and make it meaningful for people moving forward, when before it might have been an in-person where you have a group of people discussing scenarios or tactics. Now you've got to do that in a virtual world. And so I think everybody's learning how we best do that. And we'll continue to do that moving forward.
Yeah. Chief or Craig, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just echo Steve's comments, is that we do have, and part of it is the requirements, from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and whatnot for the Duane Arnold facility here in Cedar Rapids, is that we have had an opportunity over the, since that power plant was built, to train and train. It's 3 or 4 times per year. And as Steve mentioned, the pandemic that we're under has certainly limited the abilities of people to get together and be in the same room and that face-to-face contact. And we've had to navigate those challenges. But moving forward, again, just continue to work with our partners, in the city, in the state, and in the area as we always have, and work to continually improve our relationships with them and our training capabilities and whatnot through that process.
Sure. All right. Iowa's emergency management plan relies on county level coordination, but we've all noted the widespread devastation from this storm. Do you see the need for some sort of regional or even a multi-state model for help in incidents like this, or is the current scenario, current setup adequate?
In my opinion, the system worked as it should work. We obviously were dealt several challenges that we had to work to overcome. For instance, the phone systems went down, the cell phone towers. Once the power was out and their battery backup ran out, it was difficult getting cell phone signals out. So we were hampered by some of that communication stuff. But overall, the system worked as it should. We started out immediately, as I mentioned, we asked for a state resource 10 minutes into the incident. We started asking for resources that afternoon, so before the storm was even fully through. And as the week went on the recovery, not the recovery, but still kind of in the response mode, we continued to ask for resources. We were operating with our area mutual aid partners, and even, here locally, Marion and Hiawatha, and they were suffering similar levels of devastation, yet we were interacting with them. And I know we sent units, our fire units, and I can only speak from the fire perspective from the immediate response, but we sent fire units into Hiawatha. I know we received aid from both Hiawatha and Marion. We received aid from south of here, North Liberty and Swisher. Both took calls for us on the interstate south of the city in our jurisdiction. So that mutual aid aspect was working immediately as we have in place. Immediately started working with Linn County Emergency Management Agency, requesting resources as the system does. And I know that they're our conduit to the state for those resources. So the system did work. The system is in place, and it's just improving upon that system and identifying, the challenges we face and how can we overcome that in a similar situation and again, be better in the future.
Yeah, Lee, if I can, just to add on to that too, this was a disaster that affected arguably 27 counties, but we know for sure 23. So many of the resources that Linn County was asking for was the same resources that other counties were asking for of the state as well. And so, most of the agencies were, outstretched with their ability to respond. And so they reached through the Emergency Management Agency when our county resources are not available or or can't respond, then we reach up to the state, and the state reaches out to other counties. If we can't do an interstate mutual agreement, county to county, we get the state to bring in those resources. And if they don't have them in the state, they can reach out regionally and then federally. So that's kind of how that system's supposed to work, and it does. And again, this was a large, complex incident with a lot of people asking for the same resources of not only the DOT or people that could move debris or move resources, but also sheltering and feeding and housing and those kinds of things. Those resources from those agencies were taxed as well. And so it wasn't just confined to public safety or cities. It also affected the ability for other people to respond in those non-governmental organizations, and those are our partners as well. So I think the system did work. I think it's built to do that. I think Mr. Fugate might agree and have more to add, so I'll turn it over to him. But that's kind of why the National Incident Management system was set up the way it was, and the way it's supposed to work is exactly how it did work.
Yeah, the experiences we've had in Florida after several big hurricanes was we formalized. Every state it does this a little differently, but in Florida, every county and every city is part of a statewide mutual aid agreement that they all sign. And it gives us the tremendous ability in Florida to move resources around. And we actually go to the agencies to coordinate it. So in Florida, if I need fire resources, the Florida Fire Chiefs Association coordinates that throughout the state. And again, it's a very effective system, both for wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes. But another thing we learned out of hurricanes, which comes into play, is state-to-state mutual aid agreements. This was a lesson after Hurricane Andrew, and it was built upon, and most recently has been used in several of the hurricanes, the wildfires, and it was even used during COVID-19, moving equipment from state to state. And that is all 50 states have signed an agreement to be able to request resources from any other state, including the National Guard, without having to go through the federal government. And so, again, when multi-states are impacted and their response resources are overwhelmed, being able to reach to neighboring states that are nearby that aren't as heavily affected also speeds up that response. And then ultimately, the state, for those resources they cannot meet through mutual aid, through the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, the state-to-state mutual aid agreement can turn to FEMA. And historically, what FEMA does in most disasters is actually provide the financial assistance and recovery activities. But FEMA does have the capability to coordinate among the federal agencies, most notably, if it rose to that level of DoD assets, is Northern Command for coordinating any federal military support to a governor.
We've talked a lot about the issues with communications, cell data, internet service, all these things that we rely on to communicate and that we need more than ever in an incident like this that were unavailable. Going forward, what realistically can be done to sort of shore up those systems so if we were to have a similar incident in the future that we might be able to rely upon them more heavily in the future? And maybe, Craig, if there are any examples of how those systems have been shored up in other regions.
Yeah, they get hardened, they get improved, and they still go out. One of the fallacies I think we have is as we become more connected, we think that these are emergency and survival systems, and they're not. They don't survive. They don't hold up. Your cell phones become bricks. And this is the thing that even at FEMA I found was hard to get across. You have to emphasize what happens when the phone systems and cell systems go down. And because we were so used to doing that day to day, to make that switch has been difficult. I did exercises at FEMA where we told the team, I want to talk to all 50 states, but you can't talk to them on phones. You can't talk to them on cell, and you can't use satellite phones. And it put us back in the business of using HF radios. So a disclaimer, I am an amateur radio operator. I got into this after I got to FEMA, but Napa wildfires, over 200 cell sites were taken out in that wildfire. All the communications went down, yet the response didn't stop. And so I come back to this, that there are two key things we have to really emphasize. One is the role of our local broadcasters, radio and TV stations, but particularly FM radio. For many folks, when everything goes out, they lose all their communications and all they know is as far as they can walk and as far as they see. So really working with broadcasters to make sure we can get transmitters back on the air. If we can't get transmitters back on the air, get stations nearby that the FCC will give them variances to increase their power. But sometimes it's the message of, keep a portable radio disaster supply kit becomes super critical when everything else goes down. And on the response side, this is an area that I've grown increasingly concerned about as we have created single points of failures in our systems. And if nothing else, I think it reinforces the need to really exercise communication failures, because it may not be a windstorm next time. It may be a cyber attack. And this is something that is not just unique to this region. It's something we see across the country is what happens when our comms go down that we use every day? What's our backups and how effective can we be?
And if I can
go ahead.
Jump in quick. Yeah, I'm sorry. If I can just jump in real quick with that, I think that speaks to exactly what happened here perfectly. Is that we had very limited cell capabilities. We had very limited and intermittent internet capabilities, and we really very quickly started going back to the old. Of course, we met face to face in our command post. And that type of stuff. But we quickly went back to, putting things on paper. And, I kind of joked with Steve yesterday when we were kind of discussing some things, we were almost back to the town crier type of thing. Do we put a person in a tower and at hour intervals, they cry out the news or whatever, or what the local happenings are. But we started, putting that onto, gave written correspondence to our police officers that they could pass out as they were in the communities when people were doing the cleanups of, where the shelter locations were, where the neighborhood resource centers were, that type of stuff. We gave them to our local grocery stores and hardware stores, so that, because we knew people would be, once the grocery stores were online and the hardware stores were, we knew people would be going there to, to patch their roofs or clean up or get food or do whatever. And so then we just continue to expand that. And then I think the other thing too is I don't think people are as used to going in a disaster. There are local emergency broadcasting stations that are dedicated for that. And a lot of people aren't aware of that and don't know to go, if all else fails, if you can turn on or if you have a transistor radio, you can turn it on to that emergency station. And we were on those stations. But it's getting that message out and getting people that, hey, when all else fails, here's the avenues that we're going to utilize for communications.
Great. Steve, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think the answer, the other two gentlemen covered it just perfectly well. I completely agree. It's challenging, but I think Mr. Fugate said it the best, is you continue to work the issues, you continue to try and fight through it the best you can. The one thing I would say is our public safety radio system, while the 911 system was compromised for a short period of time, I don't think very long, the backup systems there worked the way they were. Our public safety radio system continued to operate. We did have communications with our other agencies, but in our case, trying to get a sense of situational awareness was a lot of times driving to the different locations that were reporting terrible damage and needs of assistance. Because we didn't have phones and we didn't have cell service and we didn't have text messaging. We literally had to go old school and travel to those locations, which took some time for us to get that situational awareness. But the public safety radio system, in my opinion, can be used better and more effectively in the future. And frankly, that's something that we're going to figure out how to do better for our communities. We just have to do that. Get the public safety radio system in the hands of our leaders so that they can do effective coordination if that's the only system we have available.
Chief Smith mentioned that you guys sort of got around the communication issues by meeting in person and relying on sort of person-to-person communication, police officers going out into the public and sort of actually handing out information. Of course, this is all going on in the middle of a pandemic when we're supposed to be staying far apart from each other. Can we talk a little bit about the challenges presented by responding to this event in the middle of a pandemic and how you're able to respond to that?
I can just start off from our operations, and it's a very good question, and it certainly was one where we had to work through those challenges, as a city, as well as regionally, with our our not-for-profit partners and emergency management partners and whatnot. And it's really, how do you navigate and figuring out how best to navigate the challenges of both? What are the necessities? We took precautions here in our command post. Obviously we had a lot of people that we needed to have on site and needed to operate. But we, to the best of our abilities, followed the CDC guidelines. We required, as we do in our facilities, we required that people wear masks unless they're eating or unless they're alone in their office or something to that aspect. So we really utilized that, and we were very fortunate that we didn't have an outbreak during that. But it's a challenge, and it's taking the circumstances that you're handed and figuring out how do we best accomplish both. And it really did present just another layer of a challenge. I mean, if this had happened where we weren't in the middle of a pandemic, obviously it will look completely different, because we could have packed people into a room to have face-to-face conversations or met routinely with them. But it was challenging, and it's just navigating the emergency and serving what needs you can, and complying with the best practices as best as possible.
And we did the same thing, Lee. We looked at all of our ESF partners and said, who do we absolutely need to have here to respond, and who can we use virtually. Virtual seemed to be kind of a little bit of a difficulty because of the communication issues, at least for the first couple of days. But really, we were trying to keep all of that pandemic guidelines in mind when activating our EOC. I mean, normally in normal situations, non-pandemic, the room would have been full with 60, 70 people from various resources and various organizations. But we just didn't feel like we could do that here. We had to really look at who we absolutely needed to have there, who we could move into the EOC and we needed there for critical decision making, and then who we could work virtually or work via text message or email with. And so that's how we operated. But it did certainly create some challenges. It certainly created some communications issues, but I feel like given the pandemic that we did a pretty decent job of having the folks that we needed in our EOC to help us do our job.
Sure. Craig, any other best practices in responding to any sort of emergency in the middle of a pandemic when you would normally be bringing people together, like the other gentlemen have mentioned?
Well, we've seen wildfires, hurricanes, derechos, floods all occurring now during the COVID-19. And the thing I think I'd like to reassure people is we're still responding. Volunteers are still sheltering and feeding people. The response did not stop. As both of the gentlemen have said, we're doing things differently, but we're still able to meet the essential needs. Fortunately, Red Cross and FEMA and others had been thinking about this as far back as March and began starting to publish guidance on NAS casualty or NAS mass care strategies, everything from how to feed people to shelter considerations. But I think the reassuring part is, as much as people were so fearful that COVID-19 would paralyze our ability to respond, is communities have been able to adapt to it, change what they're doing, but still continue a response in these disasters. And I think that's really a testament to why we focus so much on not following a written plan like it's a recipe, as much as that plan documents the team we put together to solve problems, the things we expect, the things we never dealt with before, and do it in real time, often in an environment with little information, and absolutely never having done it before for the first time, having to do something. It has been successful, not only what you're hearing here, but the multiple hurricanes we've seen in the Gulf already.
Sure. Craig, certainly when you have incidents like this where folks they've got damage to their homes, they can't reach their loved ones, power's out, cell service is out, all those things they rely on are out, and stress is running high. How do you, as someone in Steve's position, for say, sort of ignore or drown out some of that public opinion and really just focus on the plan and improving the plan?
Well, it may seem trite, but I learned a long time ago, those that are complaining are still alive. Again, in this type of event, your first focus has got to be on just getting access to areas, life safety, rescues, the injured, stabilizing the situation. And I think for a lot of people, I learned this a long time ago, people are actually going through the stages of grief when they're dealing with this kind of event. And one of those stages is they get angry. And we may be the focus of that anger, and we can't personalize it. What we really need to do is listen to what they're complaining about, not personalize that it's an attack on me, and then try to distill, okay, what are they saying? What is the need that they're identifying? And is that something that we're already doing, not doing, need to adjust? But I think it's a natural tendency. I've been yelled at by a lot of folks, including a lot of governors and other folks. And I learned a long time ago, when you're under stress and you're going through a loss or something else, getting angry is not an unusual reaction. The important thing is, don't personalize it. Don't say, well, they're mad at me. Listen to what they're saying and try to figure out what is it they're really upset about or concerned about, and try to get to that. And I found that a lot of times just being able to listen to people and give them that opportunity to vent. And then I ask the question and say, so what can we do? And once you put it back to where, okay, you need to be part of the solution. Just telling us we're not doing everything isn't working. Let us tell you what we've done, what we've got, and what do you think we could do better? And so that conversation and allowing it to develop is, sometimes when people are yelling at you, or you're reading all the Twitter and social media feeds questioning your intelligence, it's real easy to get that personal. It's against me. It's like, people are stressed. This is bad. This is not an unusual reaction. I need to listen. I need to be respectful. I may not change what I'm doing, but I need to acknowledge that people are going through pain right now, and anger is one of the ways they express that.
Sure. Steve, Captain Smith, anything you want to add, or Chief Smith, I'm sorry, anything you want to add to that?
I think Mr. Fugate said it perfectly. Is just to not personalize it, and to realize that they're going through stress, and you don't know what. I mean, you obviously know what the storm possibly did to them or their residents or their whatever, but you don't know what else they're going through, and so it's just. I like his message, and I think it's the perfect message of, don't take it personal, but listen to what they're saying. What's beneath that anger? What are they, they're obviously frustrated and they're, lashing out per se, but, what's the message underneath of that? And is that something we are doing and taking care of, and they don't have all that information to really comprehend and understand it? Or is it something we can change that focus? Or is it a gap that we say, oh yeah, that's a gap, and we need to address it further? And I think that's a perfect message to deliver. But the big thing is just, it's not personal. It's, I know that particularly in this storm, it was so widespread that probably to a person, everybody that had a hand, at least in the first 24 to 72 hours of the response, had damaged their own home, and they had, damage that they were cleaning up, and, working whatever number of hours, and then going home and saying, okay, now I have to go home and cut, my branches away, or I have to talk to my insurance company, or I have to, I'm going home and sleeping in the middle of summertime with no power and no air conditioning, just like everybody else is. And so you can understand the frustration that they're under, because we were dealing with the same thing. It's not like a tornado coming through, or it's not like the floods of 2008 where, we had extreme devastation to 10 or 12% of the city, but we also had a large amount of the city that wasn't devastated, and it was, kind of quote, life is normal. We didn't have that here. Everybody was under that. And it's just having that understanding with that.
Okay, so we got just under 10 minutes to go. We can take some questions if people have them. One that was submitted. What is the specific goal of the first Wednesday of the month test that we hear each month?
So if I understand correct, what's the purpose of testing our outdoor warning sirens and systems is to set a regularly scheduled time that we can test those systems The sirens that are in Linn County, the majority of them are owned by Duane Arnold Energy Center, and they have some requirements that those sirens and those systems be active and that they work. And when they're not working, they have a time responsibility that they have to get those things fixed. So our purpose really is, and we're fortunate in Linn County that we have such a robust system provided by the power plant, in that these sirens can tell us when they don't work right. They can tell us when they didn't operate accordingly, and we can send our technicians out to repair them. The county's Emergency Management Commission is responsible for a public warning system. It doesn't say that it's outdoor warnings, sirens. It doesn't say that it's a radio. It doesn't say it's an app on your phone. It says that they're responsible for a system. And so we like to say that our outdoor warning sirens are part of a system of warning the public. When your app, your TV, your weather radio, your outdoor warning systems all go off, it means take things under precaution, make sure you're looking at what's going on and keeping yourself safe. Really, the outdoor warning systems are a part of that system of warning people.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to submit through David? And as we wait, if our panelists have anything else that they would like to add, certainly we've got a few minutes to hear it.
I do, Lee, if you just indulge me for a second. There's a number of resources that the public can use to prepare themselves. You know, in this disaster, this was so widespread that it affected just about everybody, as I think Chief Smith mentioned. People need to have their own personal ready plans for their family, communications plans, emergency plans. They need to have at least 72 hours of supplies to keep themselves in times of disaster, to keep themselves sufficient. In this case, every public safety agency, every organization was impacted by this storm, which meant that their ability to respond was impacted as well. And so while we know the government's going to come help at some point, we also need to make sure that our public is prepared individually, that they have their own family communications plans, emergency plans built, and there's some good resources. You can go to FEMA.gov, you can go to ready.gov, and you can go to weather.gov. All of those websites have good family plans, communications plans, disaster plans, what to do in hurricanes, what to do in tornadoes, what to do in, floods, those kinds of things. So I would just make sure that the viewers know that those resources are out there, and they should go to them. They're great resources. We rely on them heavily. But I think the important thing is to make sure that people can take care of themselves in times of disaster, because it may be a while before the federal government can come in, or the local government can even come in and help them.
Sure. And, we hear a lot about tornado kits or winter weather kits or, things of that nature. Maybe can you guys list some of the, essential items that someone should have in some of those kits? As we know, Iowa's no stranger to extreme weather pretty much year round.
I would say first and foremost, get a weather radio. Get one that you can put in your house, or multiple weather radios you can put in your house. Get a portable one, get an app on your phone so you're at least weather aware. Don't travel in times of bad weather. Keep an eye on where you're going. Look at the weather at the destination you're going with. Be smart before you leave. No pilot gets in an airplane and flies away until he knows the weather en route and what he's getting himself into and where he's going and what the weather looks like on the other end. Do the same thing when you're traveling. Do the same thing for the next few days on weather. Keep up to date on what's happening with the weather. The National Weather Service has some good resources that are there, but in terms of travel kits, make sure you have blankets, some snacks, food, water for people that you're traveling with, some emergency car repairs, tools, those kinds of things to keep yourself going if you need to, or if you have to make an emergency repair. And then in terms of like a tornado kit, make sure you have blankets, shelter, food and water for people, dog food, pet food, any special needs, medication, those kinds of things. Build that checklist so that when there's severe weather approaching, you have that kit ready to go. I mean, I'm sure there's others, and those resources I mentioned have great documents that you can use to gather that.
Yeah, there's a number, and I would say just kind of add to that list, spare batteries, keep spare batteries and keep them in a kit, in your basement. Obviously, here in the Midwest with tornadoes and that type of stuff, just have a kit in your basement. And again, some extra water, some extra non-perishable food, and have a good old-fashioned radio. And then the important thing is, like Steve mentioned, is food for your pets, and then medications. Don't let your medications get down to the point where you have only 1 or 2 days left. Make sure that you have, medications that you can get through the next 72 hours or so, especially those vital medications that you have to take every day, so that you're not left without them. Kind of like what we had here, where power's out, maybe you can't get to a pharmacy, or maybe a pharmacy's not open or whatnot. So, and again, just FEMA.gov, and there's plenty of other resources out there that can give you checklists like that to make sure you have those emergency kits.
Sure. We're just about out of time. Craig, I'll give you the final word. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, add a manual can opener to that list. Hard open those cans with just your teeth.
Good point.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any questions, and we're just about done. So I'd like to thank you guys for participating in the panel. It was very interesting and enlightening, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to speak with us.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.